The History of Curb Your Enthusiasm, Season 1, Episode 9, Affirmative Action. My thoughts on the thoughts of Jeff Garlin and Susie Essman coming up right after this. Hey everyone, I'm Yoel and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So grateful to have you. And in today's video, we're going to pick up where we left off in our series on my thoughts on the thoughts of Jeffrey Garlin and Susie Essman as featured on their web series or podcast, The History of Curb Your Enthusiasm. And this is particularly on Season 1, Episode 9, Affirmative Action. So let's jump right in. As usual, I'll be referring to my notes. That's why I'm looking away from the camera in case my video editing prowess or lack thereof doesn't pick it up. And Jeff starts off telling, not starts off, but at some point in the podcast, he's talking to Susie about how Richard Lewis wanted to meet, Richard Lewis, rest in peace, I should say, although back at this point in time, he was obviously very much alive. But Richard Lewis wants to meet with Larry, and the issue he has with Larry is that he's always initiating in the friendship. And Jeff just points out how that must have been something that happened in Larry David's real life, and he took note of it, put it into his little notebook, and did a whole scene or sketch about it in Curb Your Enthusiasm, which is what usually happens. And Jeff said something so interesting, which is so true, which is that Larry David covers every part of the human condition. And it's so true. Like when you think about all the episodes of all the seasons of Curb, is there anything that Larry David hasn't touched upon? And you think about Seinfeld as well, which has Larry David's fingerprints all over it, obviously. Every part of the human condition is something that's covered by Larry David, and he's just such a master at it, which is why he's been so successful and such a comedic genius. I just thought that was a great comment by Jeff. And Larry, of course, gets himself into trouble with Richard Lewis's dermatologist, who happens to be African-American, and Larry makes a comment about affirmative action, which, as Jeff and Susie talked about in their podcast, really, like, I was surprised Susie didn't use the word fetch. It's a real stretch to call that a funny joke. One has to wonder what Larry was even thinking to begin with, but that's part of suspending belief for Curb Your Enthusiasm. Was really a crazy comment to make. And of course, he gets himself into trouble with this dermatologist who he ends up meeting later on in the episode, of course. And I noticed that Richard Lewis had a great line about Pat Buchanan. He said, like, what are you, Pat Buchanan's gym partner? Which was great. And Jeff and Susie explained who Pat Buchanan is. I don't know if he's still alive. And they compared him to a Ted Cruz or whatever. I think that's a bit extreme. I wouldn't exactly compare Pat Buchanan or Ted Cruz to Pat Buchanan. I understand why they want to kind of put it in context in today's day and age, but I would just suggest to go and Google Pat Buchanan and get an idea of his views, and you'll get a sense of what Richard Lewis meant when he was referring to Larry David as Pat Buchanan's gym partner. And that is Richard Lewis's comedic genius, to be able to reference these different newsworthy people or pop culture or icons, whatever the case may be. And it's a very intellectual brand of humor. And I think generally those who appreciate Curb have a sort, and I don't want to toot my own horn here as one of the Curb fans, but I think Jeff and Susie said this as well. There is a certain sophistication that goes along with being a fan of Curb Your Enthusiasm, because it is that type of subtle humor. And if you're more of like a linear type of person who doesn't really read between the lines, you're not going to appreciate Curb as much as those who can really appreciate the subtleties behind something. And that's what Curb is. Curb is the subtleties. As I've said many times, there's no script, there's an outline. And a lot of times the humor is in the facial expressions, it's in the subtleties. So it is a sophisticated level of humor. And Richard Lewis's level of humor is also very sophisticated. The fact that he would reference Pat Buchanan like that, and only if you really know who Pat Buchanan is, not that it takes a genius or sophisticated person to know who Pat Buchanan was, but still just kind of referencing it and being able to catch that on the fly as you're watching the show is a certain level of smarts. And that's why one of the reasons I love Curb Your Enthusiasm. Just a smart show with smart actors and great comics like Richard Lewis. May he rest in peace. And Larry had a great line when he was telling Cheryl about what happened. And Cheryl was like, oh, I'm sure you're blowing this out of proportion and making it out to be much more than it was. And Larry's like, no. I was actually making it out to be much less than it was, which is a great line. And I thought Jeff and Susie would pick up on that. They didn't talk about it. I just think it's an amazing line. Who says that? Only Larry David. Okay, I'm actually making it to be much less than it is. And of course, Larry and Cheryl go out to eat, and Larry David is nitpicking about everything, right? Why the guy has a wheelchair that's not electric, and then why he has to make small talk with the ABC person. It's exhausting to be married to a guy like Larry David. So it's not surprised that later on Cheryl ends up leaving Larry But at the time, they're very much married, and one could say happily married. And Susie talks a lot about this in the podcast, how only Cheryl would put up with a guy like Larry David. It's exhausting. Think about all the things he's nitpicking before they even get to the main course of dinner. They hadn't even ordered their food yet. And Susie uses the word schmear. Again, another Susieism. I'm going to call it a Susieism. It's a Yiddishism. A schmear is like a large amount of food, you can say, like a buffet style. That's a schmear. I mean, there's also different meanings, but that's one of them. And of course, Larry, the sole reason he wants to go to a bathroom in a nearby restaurant or hotel, wherever he goes, and not to the restaurant where he's in, is because he wants to avoid making small talk with the ABC executive. And of course, as fate will have it, he ends up going to the other restaurant's bathroom and runs into that woman who accuses him of racism, and that prolongs the theme and plot line of the story. But had Larry simply gone to the bathroom in the restaurant he was in, none of this would ever happen. So that's another classic Curb Your Enthusiasm twist that just works out beautifully for the show anyways, not for Larry David, of course. And also another slice of life, or slice of cheese. Larry David's complaining about feta cheese as they're waiting for they're at the pharmacy for Cheryl's scratching medication. They're waiting for the pharmacist, and Larry David's, they're in line, and he's just talking about feta cheese and why did they put the feta cheese in what he ordered in the restaurant is too much feta cheese. And it's a slice of life, because that's true. That's what happens when people are waiting in line. They're going to talk about inane things. And Larry David's talking about feta cheese. I just love that he has that inane chatter on the show, which makes it so real, to the point where a lot of people who watch it for the first time, they don't even know that it's fake. They think it's a real documentary. And once again, I talked about in the previous video that I did on this, where you have the co-creator of Seinfeld who's sleeping in his car in the Beloved Ant episode, season 8, if I remember to put a card up so that I could link you right to it. You have here the co-creator of Seinfeld doing what? Fishing his hands through the trash, right? Because if you remember what happened, he, instead of bribing the maitre d' for to get a seat at the table, he gave him the doctor's prescription, and then the maitre d' ended up throwing it out, and Larry's fishing around. Imagine the co-creator of Seinfeld, where he's gotten to in life, and he's fishing his hands through garbage, which I just thought was a classic, especially following the co-creator of Seinfeld sleeping in his car in the previous episode. And something I noticed as well is that when Larry did, going a bit out of order, but when Larry did bribe the maitre d', Cheryl said, "I am so attracted to you right now." And I thought it's interesting because there's this concept, I've heard this a lot, where women get attracted to a certain asshole tendency of men sometimes. I think Susie was talking about that as well. Because think about it, what did Larry do? He bribed someone. He jumped the line by bribing someone. Why would that be an attractive thing? But Cheryl was like attracted to Larry. And there is that concept of guys acting like assholes and women finding that attractive. And I thought it was interesting to hear Cheryl commenting on her level of attraction escalating for Larry. Of course, it was short-lived based on what ends up transpiring. And this is something that Jeff and Susie talked about, the music from, what was the music from? Oh, I'm forgetting, one of the Alfred Hitchcock. I wrote down in my notes Psycho, but it wasn't from Psycho. It was from a different movie of Alfred Hitchcock, and I'll have to go back and rewatch the history of Curb because they said it. I should know this, it's embarrassing. But whatever the case is that music in the show was just so funny, the way they use it as they're waiting for the phone call from the doctor on his weekend, as Larry was putting it. And just the music was perfect. I'll try to remember to download that and add that to the show. And of course, the end of the episode is once again somebody taking something to the extreme. The pharmacist, Larry, tries to bribe him and he goes nuts. Nobody bribes a pharmacist, and Cheryl ends up without her prescription, without her medication, I should say. And again, would a pharmacist really react that crazily? I don't know. Maybe some pharmacists would take a bribe. I don't know. But only in Curb Your Enthusiasm fashion does that happen, where the pharmacist just goes nuts and Larry ends up screwing it up again, walking home without the medication for Cheryl. He just messes it up at every turn. And Jeff had said that he didn't like that scene of Larry walking up the stairs kind of in an ominous fashion. Susie said she did. And I agree with Susie. I thought it was a great ending to the show. I really thought that really added to it. I thought maybe if they would have added that ominous music that they had when they were waiting for the doctor's prescription, maybe that could have been funny, but maybe too obvious. So I understand why they didn't add it, but it was great watching Larry's face as he's walking up the stairs. And he's just scared of that reaction from Cheryl. Of course, Larry, if the show would have continued into the real life, so to speak, of Larry and Cheryl, he would have found a way to sort of make it nothing. But you can see his face as he's walking up the stairs. He is not thrilled to be encountering Cheryl without the medication. So that concludes this video. I hope you found that entertaining, informative, maybe educational. And if you picked up on something on the show or on the podcast that I missed, or maybe something I did talk about, but you wanted to add your 2 cents to it, feel free to leave that in your comments. Your feedback and comments are always very much appreciated. For those who have subscribed, I'm so grateful to you. Our subscribership has been increasing steadily, and I'm so grateful. If you haven't yet, I would be so grateful if you did take a moment to subscribe. It definitely helps me, but it will help you as well to not miss a future video. Also, don't forget to hit that thumb up, like button. So grateful that you came to my channel, that you watched this video. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you at the next video. Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed that video. I've got plenty more in my videos library. If there's a topic you'd like me to discuss, feel free to leave that in the comments and I'll do my best to address it. If you can like the video, I'd be very grateful. As well, if you subscribed, you'd be helping me out. You'd also be helping yourself out to not miss a future video. Thanks so much. Have a great day.